Welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And today we get to really deal with all of those. Our guests are Vickie Brett and Amanda Selogie. And if I were not a nice person, I would really have a lot of fun with saying they're both lawyers and we could start into the lawyer jokes, but we won't get there. We won't do that. But they are very special lawyers, very seriously, because what they do is spend their days dealing with helping to get students in California the services and the support that they need. A lot of times working with what's called the IEP, which they'll explain, and representing parents and students when it's necessary to work with school districts to get the districts to do the things that they should. There are laws, and unfortunately, all too often, the districts aren't aware of the laws or choose to ignore the laws because, that would be too expensive for us to do. And they're going to talk to us all about that. So Amanda and Vickie, I just want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm Vickie Brett, and we have
Amanda Selogie.
I didn't know if you wanted me to say your name or not. And we are special education attorneys in Southern California, and we have our own nonprofit law firm called the Inclusive Education Project. For those people in the know, the acronym is IEP, which also shares the same acronym for the students with disabilities that we represent. They have individualized education plans, which lovingly go by IEP. So that's how people can remember us. We're the IEP gals, right? And we've been doing this for, oh my goodness, for like 12 plus years now as attorneys and advocates. Obviously, Amanda and I started in law school as special education advocates, and that's actually how we met. Amanda, do you want to talk about what other things our nonprofit does before we kind of get into how we met?
Yeah, of course. So the Inclusive Education Project provides kind of a number of services. One of the primary services we provide is legal services. So because we are a nonprofit, we provide both pro bono, so free services, legal services, and what we call low bono, which are low cost flat rates for families. Our representation is a little bit different than what you would think of as a normal traditional attorney. Traditional attorneys file lawsuits, and that's the primary purpose of their practice. And while there are lawsuits to be had in special education, we call them filing for due process. It is not the only thing that we do. A lot of what we do is advocating and collaborating both for and with students living with disabilities, their families, and the school team. Most of the time when families come to us, there's already conflict, things going on, that there's disagreements. So we try to come in and bridge that gap if we can. We love it when families come to us at the beginning of their journey, because then we can help guide them through that process to avoid a lot of problems that fall and get to, due process. So along those lines, the reason we have this as a nonprofit, not just to provide low cost services and free services, but our mission is really to educate and empower parents on their legal rights, but also provide more education and have a better conversation around disability rights and education between service providers and parents and families and school districts and teachers and administrators. So along those lines, we do trainings for schools and parents, and we also have a podcast where, we kind of touch on any topic under the sun relating to education and disability rights and special education, and really trying to make this world a little bit smaller in terms of getting families and schools a little bit more knowledgeable about the resources available and just the different techniques we could be using to help better educate these kids.
Well, and going beyond just acceptance to understanding and inclusivity. I think that's really the cornerstone of our nonprofit, and like why we have the podcast, the Inclusive Education Project podcast. the mentality is just to start those conversations. I think a lot of people have those conversations, but they're very surface. And so whatever we can share in our experiences of the clients that we fight for, the students, we try to do that. And it's been a nice way to kind of blow off some steam as well, because we get a lot of administrators and parents who actually reach out, and we've had some of them, which is so wonderful, because it really is, it just shows that we're all humans, and we could always be doing better. But when we see that administrators, listen to us, it makes us feel that, we're not just shouting into a void, or we're just not preaching to the choir, where we are actually being able to have these tough conversations, and have people from the district side really receive it and then provide us feedback, which has been nice. But like Amanda said, go ahead.
Oh, no, you could.
Oh, I was just going to say, we do, our bread and butter is special education. So that would be issues that children with special needs are encountering in school districts. We also do a bit of probate. We do try to provide kind of a one-stop shop for our clients, in that if they have their child, when their child becomes an adult and they need assistance with getting a limited conservatorship or certain powers to help that child transition into adulthood, we can with the limited conservatorships. And then we also provide special needs trusts, which come into play when the parent wants to kind of set up a trust, their will, to leave the child their inheritance, and to be sure that their disability is protected. We help create special needs trusts for those families. So now we've had the firm 10 years, and I feel like, Amanda, you've had your clients starting from like kinder to like high school, which is just like phenomenal. I know I've had clients, that I got, in the fourth grade, and they've already graduated, and it really warms our heart to be able to kind of discuss what it is that we do, because not a lot of people know. I think you would think that other attorneys know, but they really don't know. It's just a very small percentage of us in the nation, but then just let alone in California, compared to Arizona, where there might be only a few special education attorneys, maybe 3 in the whole state. California obviously will have a little bit more because of our state is so big, but compared to family law attorneys or personal injury attorneys, we are a very small percentage. So it's nice to be able to kind of speak to that and what it is that we do.
Well, I think be. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say a lot of people think attorneys, and they think, oh, it's just lawsuits, and everyone thinks like, oh, our country is sue happy, and like what we love to say is like we are counselors in every sense of the word. Like we try not to have lawsuits. Like we really try to encompass so much more. I mean, our practice, and that's part of just what special education is, and why some families have been with us for so long, is it's more than just the legal side.
Sure. And I thought the reason I started this one, I should say, differently than I've done a lot of podcasts. And the reason, because I think that what you guys do is really so unique, and that you have done so much to address the issue of disabilities and so on. I really wanted to give you an opportunity to really kind of explain it. But tell me, if you would, a little bit more about why you chose to go into the field of dealing with disabilities.
Yeah, Amanda, I can start. Oh, you can start.
This is Vickie. It's really funny because Amanda and I, a lot of the special education attorneys in the field, it's changing. I feel like we were like that first tide of changing, but a lot of them were attorneys in business litigation, district attorneys, and then they had a child with special needs, and then they like stumbled across this area of the law. Amanda and I really, or I'll let Amanda go into hers, but I did actually kind of stumble into it very early on in law school. Amanda and I were a year apart. I was a year ahead of her, and we both decided to study abroad in Spain and hit it off. And she was like, "We should have a class together. I'm taking this clinic, this special education clinic. You should do it too." And I thought, "Oh, okay." I was kind of already set on my path of environmental law, dating myself a little bit. I wanted to be like Erin Brockovich. My dad was in environmental science, and so I really wanted to take it up for the environment. And I had a internship with Coast Keepers, and really was kind of on that path. And once I joined the clinic, I realized that being bilingual, I could help Spanish speaking families. And I really kind of fell in love with this area of the law. It was really just, being a people person and getting involved and seeing how you could advocate on behalf of these children with unique learning challenges. And I have a cousin on the spectrum. And at the time I had kind of known, oh, he had a plan and things like that, but I really didn't know the intricacies of it. And after I graduated, I actually was hired by the professors that ran the clinic. So Amanda and I never got our class together. She was in the LA, and they pulled me from LA to the Orange County sector because I spoke Spanish. So we didn't even get the the class together, but we did keep in contact. And while I kind of worked at this boutique law firm that did special education and then also did family law, and then once Amanda graduated and passed the bar a year later, and she started working for a separate, just special education law firm, we would always get together and talk about our cases and like how we could do things differently. And what's so funny to think is we thought 10 years from now, which would be right now, right, Amanda? Which is like, would be ridiculous. Yeah. But like 10 years from now, we're going to open up our own firm. But we really quickly realized that we could just do it ourselves. And so I'll let Amanda tell how she got into it. Yeah. Because it's completely different.
I went to law school specifically knowing that I wanted to practice special education law. I fought going to law school for a very long time. It wasn't my plan. I, at a very young age, thought I was going to be a teacher, and I dabbled in costume design for theater, changed a lot. And then I kind of got back to teaching, and my, or the plan of teaching. My aunt is a special education teacher in LA and has been for like 25 years. And I had worked with kids with disabilities on and off, different capacities, summer camps, tutoring, that sort of thing in high school. And when I was getting a degree in child development, I started working as a one-on-one aide for a child in a charter school. And the charter school was a full inclusion school. So one of those schools that is kind of one in a million, where full inclusion is done very well and works very well. And so I had the benefit of seeing that while I was in college. And I worked primarily with this little boy who had Down syndrome, but I worked with a few other students as well. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I fell in love with working with the kids. And I was just so inspired by not only the kids that I worked one-on-one with, but the other kids in the class and the whole school, just the dynamics and the vibe, and just the collaborative nature of the school, everyone working together, everyone was on the same page, everyone was treated the same, like, and it wasn't unfortunately what we see in a lot of schools. And I thought this is right. I'm going to be a special ed teacher. But then that kind of shifted, because as I worked more and more with the school and with certain families and learned how just what an anomaly this one school is, and that was not the case in 99% of schools, and that families really had to fight tooth and nail to get services, even a fraction of what I saw in this school. And I learned about due process. I learned about some of these families having to fight through the legal system. And, I had this thing in the back of my head of being told as a kid, you should be an attorney, because I like to argue, I guess, and talk. It's something that I never wanted. I never wanted to go to law school. English was not my subject. I was a math kid. But I felt in my gut that I would be one of those teachers that would speak up and get fired, or I would push too many buttons, and it would be very challenging for me to sit on my hands and not say anything. And so it kind of just fell together. Like I kind of fell into it as like an aha moment of, this is the way that I can support and work with these kids, and do something that I was kind of pushed to do. And I found out a little bit more about this area of law and how there's very few attorneys that do it. And I was really intrigued by the fact that it was very individualized and new, and it wasn't something that was very cookie cutter. And I liked that I could be creative and have that creative side to it. So went to law school, and, Vickie shared our story of how we met, and was fortunate enough that I did go into this field, and I continue to fall in love with it and the kids that we work with. And, when Vickie and I started our practice, a big part of it was because we saw the way things were being done with other firms. And the focus was on cases and lawsuits and getting good case law and pushing for changes in legislation. And while all that's important, it takes a toll on families, and it's not something that is a quick resolution. And so while these cases go through the court system, these kids are getting older and older, and next thing you know, they're out of school. And while the system may have been impacted by their case, they haven't been. And we just felt like this wasn't what we were meant to do. We were meant to help a different way, similar to how I felt when I was in undergrad. And so when we started our firm, we had this goal of having a bigger impact than just one case at a time. And I think that's why, we have clients Vickie mentioned that we've had for a very long time. I have some that started in kindergarten and are now in high school, because our goal isn't to file lawsuits. Our goal isn't to hide things and prepare for a hearing or prepare for litigation, which is what a lot of attorneys do. That's their focus. Our goal is, how can we help this child right now? How can we help the school right now? Because a lot of what we're doing is help the teachers get more services and more supports into the classroom, to get teachers and school staff trained to keep environments safe. And that's why, we love what we do, because we can be very creative, and the law allows us to be, because everything is supposed to be individualized. And the law is there to protect kids. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems we see is that enforcement is just not there, because it does take attorneys like us coming in to enforce the law. It takes parents fighting to enforce the law, choosing to fight to enforce the law. So, we do things just a little bit differently.
Okay, and I can appreciate that. How much of your caseload deals with disabilities and special services like what we've been talking about?
Well, I would say 100%, because all of our clients have a disability. Even our small sector of probate still deals with, it's not traditional probate, it's only the conservatorship and special needs trusts. But I'd say about 5% is probate. The rest of it is dealing with schools and school districts. So just about all of our cases.
So I'm familiar with IEPs, and actually when I was growing up, I don't think we had an IEP. If we did, I never knew about it, but I've been a staunch advocate and love to help people when they have questions about IEPs and so on. So again, it's individualized education plan. But what are some of the biggest challenges that parents face when dealing with the whole special education and educational process?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it ebbs and flows, but I would say the biggest challenge is not knowing what they don't know. And when you have a child that maybe has some type of disability, right? If it's outward, they're diagnosed with cerebral palsy once they're born, and you kind of have some time to really be able to kind of digest that information. I think that parent will come to the school district a bit more prepared to say, hey, this is my child. This is what I think my child needs. And they'll be able to speak to it. When we have parents that have their child go into the school system and they don't know that their child has some type of learning challenge, that is where I think it kind of gets sticky. So the child may have dyslexia, the child may have some of these disabilities that you wouldn't necessarily know until your child really started learning things. And of course, here in California, we always talk about 0 to 5 and the push to, read to your children and all this stuff. But, unless you have a child development background, sometimes it's, and your child best, but sometimes you don't really understand what their challenges are until they're in the school system. And so oftentimes we'll get parents that have maybe had IEPs for a couple years and they've had a great team, but some of those team members change. And then they start to feel not heard. They feel that their child is not seen. And then they get mad and they Google, attorney. And so that's why, we feel that some of these challenges and what our podcast really tries to focus on at times are these different issues that come up. What is it that you have to look for if you believe that your child should be eligible for an IEP? How do you request that? What is an IEP? What are present levels? But yeah, I think the biggest challenge, because even if you know your child inside out, it's sometimes really hard to navigate the politics, if you will, of these individualized education plan meetings. I have, for instance, like one case where the child very clearly needs a one-to-one aid. Everybody has said it, but the administrator, for whatever reason, has not put it in the IEP that the child has said it. The general education teacher says he needs one. The RSP teacher says he needs one. His speech and language pathologist says he needs one, but we just haven't gotten there. And that to me just seems wild, right? That this child has not put it in. They haven't put it in the IEP, and it's because, and they even said it. Well, we're in an aid shortage. We don't have an aid that we can provide him. Oh, well, if we try to hire one, it's going to take forever. These are not excuses that, you should be standing on. The law is very clear about it. But yes, do we understand that there are some things that we need to kind of push in order to get it done? Just because you can't hire an aid that would just work exclusively for the district doesn't mean you can't go with a private agency that could provide an aid, right? But that's going to cost more. So that's what I mean about like the politics of it. Amanda, what big challenges do you think? And like I said, it ebbs and flows, so it just depends on our caseloads. That was one that just came to my mind. But what about you? What do you think as a big one?
I mean, I think that training and experience plays a big role. Whether we're dealing with a child who's in a general education class and that general education teacher has a general education credential. They do not have a special education credential the majority of times. They have not received any training. Maybe they've had a few kids on IEPs, maybe they haven't. And the reality is that a general education credential doesn't come with specialized training for special education.
Yeah.
They may be a bit knowledgeable about there may be a child with a disability. My degree was at a school where a lot of students were getting their teaching credentials at the same time. So I took the majority of the same classes as the students that were going to get their credentials. They just had one extra year. And I can tell you, based on my course load and based on the course load of all my friends that were in the teaching credential program, there was one class that had anything to do with special education, and it was very minimal. And it wasn't a guarantee that even everyone took it. And I took that class, and I can tell you that it's very minimal. It doesn't really train you on how to implement an IEP or how to understand the why behind a lot of what's in the IEP. And while a general education teacher may come to an IEP meeting, an IEP meeting isn't training. It's, development of the accommodations and the goals. And they may get a fraction of the information about that child's disability, but they're not an expert on autism. They're not an expert on ADHD. They're not an expert on sensory processing deficit and so a lot of perceptions occur. We have a lot of teachers that make assumptions. They may have had one child with ADHD and they think they're all going to be the same. And this worked for them. So that not. There's a lot of perceptions that they seem fine if they would just, and then fill in the blank, right? If they would just do their work, if they would just show up to class, if they would just pay attention. The assumption is that they should be able to do all these things just like every other child.
When you say they, who are you referring to as they?
A lot of times the teachers, because
okay.
they don't have that specialized training. And frankly, even a special education teacher has a specific credential, but there's so many vast different abilities and disabilities out there, and there's spectrums. There's, not all kids that have one diagnosis to be the same. There's comorbidities. There's even when you look at, like, if you analyze and review an assessment report for an individual child, there's a lot of numbers in there, right? Of low scores or average scores or below average. But there's not a lot of times an analysis of how does this impact the child in the classroom. And so a lot of teachers have kind of the variety of knowledge and experience and training on kids. And IEPs are developed in a way that are supposed to be individualized to that child. And so if that teacher isn't given training on that child's needs, a lot of times, like I mentioned, we have these assumptions about what a child should be able to do or shouldn't. But then we also have, how do we implement the accommodations that are there? How do we implement the services? And if we have speech therapy, are we really collaborating between the speech therapist and the special education teacher and the general education teacher and the parent, so that we're using a lot of the same strategies and implementing? And so a lot of times we get families that come to us and the IEP on its face looks okay. A lot of times the IEP doesn't look okay. But in many circumstances, we can fight and we can make sure that the IEP looks okay. But if it's not implemented appropriately, because there's not a lot of training or not the right training, or we don't have ongoing analysis of these different factors, then it's going to cause problems. And there's not really a mechanism for the school district to sit there and say, let me analyze each of these IEPs and make sure that everybody involved has the proper training. There's nobody that's doing that.
Yeah, it's not even just the teachers, it's also the administrators who get no training in this at all. How do people find you? So it's not like you're Jacoby and Myers or any of those kinds of things. So the reality is that there are so many people who probably aren't even familiar with the whole IEP process and what their rights are, what their children's rights are, or the parents' rights or the children. How do they find you?
Most of the time it's word of mouth. So you have parents that either, like I said, Google us, right, and are able to find us that way, or hear us on our podcast, or even on our social media. They're able to find us and are able to kind of contact us that way. But for the most part, it's word of mouth. So one parent, starts talking to other parents, and then, our name comes up. We also do a lot of presentations for nonprofits, and have in the past done for schools, private schools, and really I've tried to just kind of be out in the community, and do. Pre-COVID, we had done a lot of panels and discussions, and really just, like I said, start those conversations. We network with a lot of professionals that are not attorneys. Other attorneys usually get referrals from other attorneys. Potentially we could get, and we've done conferences like family law attorney conferences and personal injury attorney conferences. They might be the ones more often than not that come across a family with a child with some type of unique learning challenge or disability. But I would say the majority of our cases come from a parent that was talking to a parent in the hospital on the way to a physical therapy appointment, or even just during pickup. Which is great, because that's it's always easier to refer someone that to somebody that has a problem that they need help, especially at a legal level with.
So one question that comes to mind is, who pays for your services, and how does that all work out? Because I got to imagine that a lot of the parents can't really afford any kind of substantive legal fees.
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on what kind of services we're providing. We do have a portion of our services that are pro bono, so they're free to the families. There is a section of the legal statute that says parents should be entitled to legal representation because of the way the system was set up. So if you go through due process, through litigation, and you go to hearing and you win, then you are entitled to get your attorney's fees paid for. So whether the family pays up front or they don't, and it's pro bono, if you prevail in hearing, you can get attorney's fees paid that way. 95% of special education cases settle; they don't go to hearing. So part of the negotiations in this settlement is for attorney's fees. Because the school district recognizes that parents are entitled to that. And, the settlement wouldn't happen if not, but for the attorney's involvement. And because they are entitled to it, settlement funds do get included as part of the settlement agreement. And then there are circumstances that don't involve litigation, and families want our help to either help coordinate or walk them through the system of IEPs, help them kind of manage it. And so those services, we do offer a flat rate. So we don't charge by the hour. We do low flat rate services. And typically our clients retain us for an entire year. That allows us to follow them through that IEP process, because it's not just 1-2 hour meeting. It's a lot of follow-ups and a lot of making sure that IEPs are being implemented and things need to be tweaked, and follow-up meetings. And so in those cases, families do pay, but we do have a sliding scale. So it's really based on household income and size, the complexity of their case, but they're all lower rates and they're flat fees.
When you say lower rates, I'm just curious, can you give us an example, or is that something you can easily do?
Yeah. So, I mean, because some of those attorneys, we know, obviously we're really transparent with our colleagues, but, the boards have to, at times, the school boards have to have meetings where they are approving the attorney's fees. So our attorney's fees, compared to some of those in Southern California, if they charge hourly, it can be anywhere from about $600-$800 an hour. Out in LA, if you're getting the cream of the crop, it's similar pricing as well. If they are charging hourly, there are very few that will take a majority of their cases as the pro bono cases, as Amanda explained that we do. They do them because the statute does indicate that we can get some of our attorney's fees, but something that I think parents don't necessarily understand is that, because it's a negotiation tactic of the districts to not pay all attorney's fees, right? So if you're the parent and you're paying an attorney $10,000 and they've resolved everything at mediation, your child's getting everything that you wanted, but then the district comes back and says, well, we're only going to pay you $5,000. That puts the attorney in a weird position, because you as a parent want all your 10,000 back, right?
Right.
But this is a negotiation, and so then that's not likely going to happen. And we just take that out of the equation. Like, we're going to be the ones that are going to be deciding what we are going to accept. We're not putting that on you, because we have had colleagues where over a couple $1,000s, the parent had to go to hearing and then ended up ultimately losing on several issues that technically the settlement would have resolved for them very easily, simply because they wanted all of their attorney's fees, and that was the client's decision, right? And so, yeah, we just delete that from the equation. And if anyone's going to be making that decision, it's Amanda or I, especially knowing that a lot of these districts use it as a tactic to keep attorneys from providing these services for free to many families.
What I was thinking of more when I asked the fee question was not so much the cases that go into litigation, but more the cases where you're helping someone go through the IEP and so on. And so I'm not really looking at it in terms of, since I understand not all cases go to litigation, but for the other cases that don't go through litigation, how does that work?
Yeah, not a lot of attorneys will do like the yearly care maintenance package that we do with a flat rate. They will still charge hourly. So there are advocates that will advertise that they can help at IEP meetings. So maybe this was a former school psychologist turned, educational consultant, and they can walk you through the IEP process. And so some of them can be just as expensive as an attorney in Southern California.
But for you
yeah,
guys.
yeah. Well, I mean, some of them are charging $400 or $500, and the problem that they get into is that that's okay to help navigate, but when it comes to a point where you're leaving things on the table, for instance, let's say the child has needed speech and language services for 2 years, and you finally secure it as an advocate, but you are not, going back to the district. They can't, because they can't sue them. But if you're not turning that case over to an attorney so that the child can be made whole by being provided compensatory education in the form of speech and language for them not having it for the past 2 years, I think that's where it kind of gets sticky. But yeah, I mean, a lot of
but if you guys were doing if you were doing a flat rate kind of thing, sort of what's the range of that over? Let's say you're going to be helping someone, say, for a year. Kind of what's the general range of that for you guys?
That kind of changes year to year. Obviously, costs increase and stuff like that. But I mean, it can really go from a couple $1,000s up to 10 or more thousand. Just it really, really depends.
That's fine. That's what I was curious.
Our board kind of lays out some guidelines. We do it based on income, so we try to keep the fees low. But some families, the case is fairly simple, and what we're looking to do is just kind of help and give them advice. Other times, like, we possibly have to file for due process. So in those cases, it could be more, it could be less. It really depends. But of course, if you look at the amount of time that Vickie was explaining, it's nowhere near the hourly rate that most attorneys
no, and I understand that.
Yeah.
And I understand that. So here's another question regarding that. Are there ever times when, again, let's not go to a due process litigation kind of thing, but where you're helping a parent and essentially you're helping the school district as well, because typically there isn't a lot of expertise. Do you ever find that when that kind of thing occurs, that the school district will help pay any of the fees, or is that really always going to be on the parent alone?
Usually the only time the school district will pay for fees outside of litigation is if there's a settlement agreement. So there are times where we're working with the school team and both sides recognize that there's a conflict that needs to be resolved. The school district maybe wants to provide something, but they want it to be confidential. They don't want other families to know they're providing a service. But they don't want to go through litigation. They don't want to have to deal with a lawsuit. So we will negotiate settlements sometimes outside of litigation, and usually included in that is attorney's fees, because if we're avoiding litigation, that's similar. So, but usually not through just the IEP process. They don't say like, hey, we'll throw you a couple bucks for these services, unfortunately.
Yeah, it'd be nice, but unfortunately that kind of funding isn't there. And so it is difficult. But what kind of advice would you give to parents who may disagree with an individualized education program? If I could talk, I'd be great. What kind of things might you suggest for a parent who disagrees with a plan to at least deal with the process? And I mean, obviously, at some point they have to call in someone like you, but what are some things that a parent can do up front if they say, no, I really don't agree with this?
Yeah. So, I mean, make that known, especially at the IEP, get a copy of the IEP. And if, for instance, let's say they're taking away occupational therapy, your child's had it for, 30 minutes a week for forever. And, they do an assessment and they say, oh, well, we don't think he needs it anymore. The parent can initiate stay put. And so essentially what that says to the district is, I don't agree with taking this away. And so I'm not going to agree for you to take it away. And the services that we've had in the past are what's going to stay put, right? That we're not going to change that. That also signals to the district that they either need to hold another IEP, and you can try to compromise at that IEP. Oh, well, maybe let's do a fade out plan, or maybe, you know what, instead of 30 minutes a week, maybe we're willing to do every other week, right? Of course, they're going to have their own say in why they don't, think that they need these services anymore. But at least it kind of gives them an indication like, oh, okay, there's something wrong here. If the district doesn't do another IEP, maybe, it's time for you to kind of raise the flag a little bit and say, go to the either the principal or the director of special education and ask for maybe a confidential meeting. Maybe you guys can resolve this outside of the IEP. The only thing that we would kind of advise as well is that we've had some districts that work really great with the parent and make changes to the IEP, even though the meeting was confidential. But more often than not, what the district will try to do in that confidential meeting is have you sign a confidential settlement agreement. And that is now a legal document, and you may be giving up rights that you didn't even know that you had. So if you were to do that, always have an attorney, review that information. But at least, the starting point would be, hey, let me see if we can informally resolve this by either having another IEP, I'm staying put, or maybe having a separate conversation with somebody higher up, like the director of special education for the district.
And what we see a lot of times.
I think one of the more important things that people really need to understand is that an IEP isn't just something that the educational system can say, this is it. It is negotiable. It is up to the parent to bring in whoever they feel they need to bring in to help, if they need to, represent their rights. And the reality is that the child and the parents do have rights. And the school system does not have the right to just say, this is it. This is why it's an individualized education program or plan. It is a plan, and everyone needs to agree to it. And the reality is many times, what's really going on. It's a game of I and the school district don't want to spend money, and the parent is saying, you gotta, it's the law. But a lot of parents really don't understand what their rights are regarding IEPs. And that is what is so unfortunate, because they can be waylaid in so many ways. How do they learn what they need to know about the whole IEP process? I realize, and I would say right off the bat, my answer to that would be in part, find you. But beyond that, how do parents learn? Because I would think that the smarter they are about the IEP process, the quicker it might be that they will bring you in because they know what you can do. But how do they learn about the process?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of resources online. I mean, if you just Google terms like, my rights with an IEP or, help with IEPs, there's, tons of websites and articles out there. Certainly there's a lot of information on social media as well. We are very active on social media, providing tips and tricks and, the basics of what, parents' legal rights are and that sort of thing. And then, of course, we have our podcast where we do just that, try to provide some information for families and educators on things that they can be doing most of the time to avoid litigation. So there are a lot of resources out there, I think. And one thing that we love that when parents find is that there's a lot of parent groups out there, both like that meet in person. And then as a consequence of COVID, a lot of Facebook groups have popped up. So for families who are looking for like local support on their school district, a lot of times they can find a Facebook group of parents within their school district or their geographic region, because there are some things that vary state to state. And so sometimes that can be really helpful, is talking to other parents about what their experiences have been and what they've done and things like that.
So what advice would you have for parents who really want to develop a good collaborative and working relationship with their school district and their school, assuming that the school district or school also wants to really develop a good, positive, collaborative relationship. And I'm sure that there are some who don't because they feel we know all there is to know and that's it. But what's the advice for parents who want to really establish a good relationship?
I think is for the parent to have confidence in that they are the expert of their child. I think that kind of gets lost a little bit when you have 10 people on one side, kind of describing a different child than you see. You are the expert. And I think having the confidence to say that and to really bring the room back to, hey, it's not me against you, it's us against the problem. I think being collaborative in the sense of, if your child has diagnoses, being able to provide that information to the school. Sometimes we'll get parents that, for privacy, don't want to share. But if that diagnosis is impacting the child and how they're accessing the curriculum, and it's not something that's, going to be on their forehead, right? And it's something to help the district kind of see, oh, well, yeah, I can see why she would need this as an additional accommodation. You need to be as transparent as possible. We oftentimes get parents that have, information that they're holding on to because they think it's going to negatively affect the child, but they don't really know, right? It's just them kind of hiding the ball. And while the district shouldn't do that, they do that. I think people kind of pick up on that. But I think at the end of the day, being able to, if you need to have an IEP meeting, why are we having the IEP meeting? Asking the district to provide documents, even draft documents before the IEP. There's no set law in California that mandates that they have to provide it to you. But one of the reasons that we ask for drafts of, an assessment or even the draft IEP is not because we want to see what the district is going to do and say, no, we know it's a living document, but let's get it beforehand so that I can read it and come prepared to the IEP meeting to ask whatever questions or make any corrections. And I think just these few kind of tips and tricks of and having that in your back pocket has helped a lot of our clients when they no longer need our services, right? That's just kind of like the baseline. We're coming with open arms to this meeting. We want to know as much information beforehand so we can make the best use of everybody's time.
And then too, like along the lines of trusting your gut, like don't be afraid to ask for things. Don't be afraid to ask for information. So using our WH language, who, what, where, why, when, we want to ask details. A lot of times we get information and parents are afraid to ask more questions. But if you don't truly understand what's being told to you or the why behind it, you're not going to get the answers. And often by parents asking, well, why do you think this is, or why do you think this isn't working? Or why do you think this does work? By asking those questions, often it gets the team to have a better communication. And sometimes we just need to ask for more. We need to get more data. We need more information. And it's from those questions that the team realizes we need more information. But then also, don't be afraid to ask for things. They're never going to give you things you don't ask for.
No. I remember growing up very much pre-IEP. Don't tell. And I remember we moved from Chicago after I was in kindergarten, and here in California, they start kindergarten the year after Illinois. So I ended up with 2 years of kindergarten. The second year was pretty boring because they had no facilities. In the first year, when I was in kindergarten in Illinois, they actually, because there were so many preemie babies who became blind, they actually, with the encouragement, sometimes pretty strong, of the parents, they actually developed a kindergarten class for blind kids. And I learned Braille and so on, and all that went away coming out to California. And when I was in school, I remember one afternoon, there was an incredible shouting match between my father and the principal of the school because they wanted to ship me off to the California School for the Blind. Oh, interesting. Now, the reality is, I I think academically, CSB was still pretty decent at that time in terms of dealing with blind kids. Certainly earlier it was. But still, they wanted to ship me off to the California School for the Blind, and my parents would have nothing to do with that. And they did eventually just plain put their foot down and said, no, we're not going to allow him to be sent away. But it does happen, and it's unfortunate that there had to be such a battle over it, but that's the way it went. And ever since then, I've had a few times where in the past the educational system tried to discriminate against me. In fact, when I was a freshman in high school, the superintendent of the district didn't want my guide dog on the school bus, which was an incredibly gross violation of state law. But his position was that local school rules superseded state law. Well, he lost that battle.
Rightly so. My goodness.
He lost that battle when my father kind of accidentally wrote a letter to the governor of the state of California about it. And, you know, so parents do have to be advocates.
Yeah.
And shouldn't be afraid to be advocates, but make sure you're advocating for something that makes sense to advocate for. And that's something, you know, in discussing this whole thing, it is also something, it seems to me, that parents need to really understand what their children are capable of. I've seen so many times that parents of blind kids, for example, didn't think a blind kid could do anything, and they were part of the problem and not part of the solution.
And that's hard. And I think, you know, we come across that, and I think one of the reasons why it's helpful if the parents come to us early on in their journey of getting an IEP is because having the thought of who your child was going to be before they were born and it not match, and then having the child be born and it not match that ideal kid that you had is very hard for a lot of parents. And there's grief that's involved that sometimes even at 12, when we're seeing the parent, you know, they've been a parent for 12 years of this child, and they're still grieving. And some people get there quicker than others. And that is difficult, because if you have one sort of mentality, you're either part of the solution, right, or you are part of the problem. And so we've seen that as well. And you know, if you are searching for help, I think that's why Amanda had said, not just, you know, running to an attorney, but talking to other parents is completely beneficial.
Yeah, and it's not all about running to an attorney by any means. I mean, and there are a lot of reasons to bring an attorney into it for the expertise that they bring. But at some point, and you know, we've talked about this a little bit in our original call, we've got to change how we view disabilities. And then it's my position that disability does not mean a lack of ability, and that everyone has disabilities. And the problem is we've got to get over this feeling that someone is less than someone else just because they're different. And I'm so glad earlier in our conversation today that you talked about inclusion and you didn't use diversity, because diversity typically doesn't involve disabilities anyway. People exclude us. And that doesn't work with inclusion. And so I'm glad that you used that term, but we've got to get beyond this idea that disability truly means a lack of ability.
Absolutely. And like I said, it goes beyond just acceptance, right? And that's what we're pushing the limits of it. I forget, I think I had heard, oh my gosh, Trevor Noah give this as an example. You know, it's wonderful when you build a house and then you think, oh, you know what? I need to have a wheelchair access ramp here. That's wonderful. I think it's another thing, and this was the best part, when before you even build that house, you think, I want this to be accessible for all, and truly all. So let me go to all these people to see how I can create that house that will truly, you know, having that person in mind before you even start is a
But not
wonderful,
an
wonderful
afterthought.
thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Where are some
right.
places people can go to learn that kind of thing?
Oh, goodness. We have come across a couple great institutions that actually reach out to districts and provide this type of training. What our current fight is to try to get this to the teachers, right? To be part of their curriculum. And so that they have those tools but a lot of teachers also already are doing, as long as you know and connect with your student and you can think outside the box and be afraid, not be afraid of not knowing what you don't know, then as long as you are paying attention, you're fine. But there are a lot of the curriculums, like I can't think of any names off the top of my head, but there are people doing it.
Let me help.
Oh, yes.
Kind of one of the things I was thinking of when you were talking about building houses and so on is things like centers for independent living. Oftentimes they've got a lot of expertise. There's certainly a lot of resources that one can Google, like you talked about. The big problem with building houses for people is that architects are mostly very clueless about dealing with anything regarding accessibility. In fact, when we built this home in 2016, and my wife was a paraplegic her entire life, we were the main experts that guided the construction of the house from an accessibility standpoint. But even then, when the house was all built and we thought everything was going to be fine, the builder would not put a ramp at the front door nor the back patio. And he said, well, you're in a flood zone. And so we can't. 2 points about that. Because we contacted, and unfortunately, the builder still wouldn't address it, so we had to do it. But we contacted the county and went to the people down in San Bernardino who are involved with this, and they said it's ridiculous to say even if you were, we first of all we're not in a flood zone, but even if we were, it doesn't matter. Water's still going to travel the same whether it's up a step or up a ramp. And the reality is there is only one specific way that there would be a problem in putting in a ramp at a front door or whatever, and that is if there isn't what's called a weep screen or whatever to deal with the water going under the house. That can be an issue. But that wasn't the issue with our situation, and the builder wouldn't do it. So we had to spend the money to do it. And it shouldn't have had to be that way, and it was grossly expensive, but it's now done, of course. And that was the only thing that they didn't do. But the reality is there are a lot of resources. The architectural industry and the building industry is oftentimes just not overly good about dealing with access themselves. You're right. The fact is that when people are constructing something new, it would be so wise if right from the outset, they would look at all the possible options. And, we thought about it when we built this house as well. This is now a home that's available for anyone who might need a home. When we built our home in New Jersey in 1996, the same thing. There we had a great builder. His biggest frustration was that the city of Westfield gave them great grief at putting in the elevator that we needed to have because the only kind of home we could build back there was a 2-story home. That's what the not association, but that street was all about, was 2-story homes, and there wasn't need to have a ranch style. And the county and the city just gave our builder great grief, which he finally worked through. But again, it was a completely accessible house as it should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, this is kind of our small area of the world that we are trying to make better. But, we're just so grateful for the opportunity to be able to have these conversations, and to be able to put it out there. And we're just so grateful for this opportunity, Michael. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, and I know that we are scheduled now to come on your podcast a little bit.
Yes.
So tell me, what's the name of the podcast?
It's the Inclusive Education Project podcast. We just took our name. We weren't super creative, make it easy for people to find us.
So there you go. And if people want to reach out to you and engage you or talk to you, learn more and so on, how do they do that?
Yeah,
probably the best way is through social media or emailing, going to our website, inclusiveeducationproject.org, and our handle on all social media is Inclusive Education Project. We're pretty easy if you Google us to find us. And
if people want to email you, how do they do that?
It'll be admin@iepcalifornia.org.
admin@iepcalifornia.org. Do you just do work in California, or do you ever consult outside the state?
So our legal work, we're licensed to practice only in the state of California, but of course we do trainings and presentations and consulting work for like schools and whatnot all across the country because the law is the federal law.
Yes, we are dealing with federal law on it, so it does make sense to be able to do that. Well, I want to thank you both, Amanda and Vickie, for being here. This has been fun, but here's the term, educational as well. So I really want to thank you both for being here with us, and I think telling us a lot and teaching us a lot. And for parents listening, reach out to Amanda and Vickie, and they will be very happy to speak with you and can probably help in so many ways. But remember, ultimately, parents, you have the power. Don't give it up. Don't underestimate your child. And because of that, make sure that what you do really creates an IEP that works for the child. That's ultimately what we're all about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael.
Well, thank you all. And I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to email me if you would at Michael, Michaelhi, at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, which reminds me, we met you two through Sheldon Lewis. How did that come about? How do you guys know Sheldon?
Yeah, you know what? We were we were making these small changes to our website, and I got connected to him because we are a nonprofit, and it's been just such a wonderful breath of fresh air to find a community. So he's always asking us to put our input on blogs and always promoting us, and we the same. It's nice to be part of the little Accessibe community.
It's great. You guys have Accessibe on your site now?
Yes, we do.
We do.
There you go. Well, thank you very much for doing that. And if you want, everyone, I gave you my email address, michaelhi at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson. Wherever you're listening, please give us a 5-star rating. And also, as many of you know, ever since September 11th, 2001, after escaping from the World Trade Center, I have been a public speaker. If you ever need a speaker, would love to chat with you about speaking at events and for engagements that you might need. So please feel free to email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. That's the quickest way to get immediately noticed. But please, again, give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening. We value it. And for all of you, including Vickie and Amanda, if you know anyone else who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, please let us know. Love any suggestions for guests that you can possibly give us. And with that, I want to just thank you both, Vickie and Amanda, one last time for being here. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.